I had a great day. I spent it with Mr. Lund. Yeah.
You want to wait a little while? Or?
You can go ahead and start if you want, and as people come in, we'll admit them to the Zoom, or they can come join in with us.
We'll see if we're going to be too loud. Okay. We probably don't need this tonight. My name is Philip Page, and this is my wife Debbie. We live in Dillon. We live actually between Dillon and Bannock, on the old Bannock Stage Road. And so a lot of history there in Bannock, and we know that it ties into Fort Benton as well, doesn't it? But a lot of what I do is I sing quite a bit of, I sing cowboy music and try to tie it in with history that took place back in the 1800s. And so we'll get into a little bit of that, but I think it's always been intriguing for me to look at Montana history when it first began. And if we go back to the Lewis and Clark Accord of Discovery coming up the Missouri River, when they got to the Mandan village, there was 59. But when they continued on, there was 33. Of course, one being a young Indian girl, Sacagawea, and a baby, Pomp. And we think about any of us that are interested in Montana history, you can't help vision what was that like just a little over 200 years ago. And for many of us younger ones, 200 years ago might as well be 2000. But as we get older, 200 years ago doesn't seem that long ago. My great-grandfather was born the year before Fort Benton went in, 1845. He was in the Civil War. He joined in 1863. Of course, the Civil War ended in 65, but that's how new our history is. And I tell people this story. We were down, me and Debbie have made a living horseback since 1976. With Cowboy done a lot of big outfits and packed and guided hunters into the backcountries of the Frank Church Wilderness, the Selway Wilderness, and throughout Montana. So we spent our life a horseback and maybe living as close as you could to the way it was 150 years ago. And so a lot of that history is intriguing to me. And it's fun to dig into it and tie some music into it, like I said. But we think of Lewis and Clark coming up the river, some of the things that they saw. And Charlie Russell, even though we know that he was an artist and he was a storyteller, but I believe that he was a historian as much as anybody, because he was historically correct in what he painted. And one of the paintings that stands out in my mind was one that he did called When the Land Belonged to God. Do you remember which one that was? It's the Missouri River with thousands of buffalo swimming the river. And remember, the Lewis and Clark expedition had to stop. They were afraid the buffalo would turn their boats over. And so they stopped and waited for hours for a big herd of buffalo to cross the Missouri River. And he paints that iconic picture. The land belonged to God. We can't imagine in our wildest dreams, 200 years ago, a little over, 1804 through 6, that the Lewis and Clark expedition come up the river. And at that time, it's estimated there could have been as many as 40 to 60 million buffalo from Canada to Mexico, as far east as Kentucky. And so in that 80-year period, they were all but exterminated. And we learn from that, don't we? We learn what was done, but we learn what not to do also. And then we go into that mountain man era, and we know that John Colder turned around, one of the men on the expedition, came back up the river. So did some of the other ones like John Potts, George Druard. They could see what was here. They were fur hunters, and they liked, evidently, the excitement of learning new country. And adventure, I guess you could say, to its fullest. Of course, we know that John Colder, when you go upriver here to Three Forks, made that famous run from the Blackfeet, and he escaped with his life. And John Potts was with him. but John Potts was killed by the Blackfeet because he went for his rifle. The history goes on, and Charlie Russell was capturing not only those days of Lewis and Clark, but as we see, what intrigued me, I think, too, was that a little over 20 years after the Lewis and Clark expedition, they were bringing steamboats all the way up to the confluence of the Yellowstone, and they put in a trading post called Fort Union. Maybe you've been to it. They've rebuilt that fort also down there, this side of the North Dakota border, this side of Williston. Fort Union went in 1828. 25 to 45,000 buffalo hides a year were going back down the river. Things are changing. People were starting to come into the West, a lot of fur hunters. But as we go west, I tell people this story. We live over there, and Debbie's family comes from the Bitter Valley over there south of Missoula. So Lewis and Clark, they meet the Salish Indians in Sula, Montana. You know where Sula is? It's upriver from Hamilton. The last little town before you go over the top of the divide, Sula, Montana. And that's where Lewis and Clark met the Salish Indians. And Charlie Russell paints the painting that sits in the Capitol building called Ross's Hole. And I'm thinking, why did he call it Ross's Hole? Because he painted that, after 1900. Well, come to find out, he names it that because Alexander Ross, it's a trapping brigade coming from the west. And they come into Sula, and then they get hung up in what they called Ross's Hole. Alexander Ross called it the Valley of Trouble because there wasn't much to eat. They were eating horses. And this is a trapping brigade, 55 trappers, their wives, most of them Native American women, and their children. There was almost 150 people, 300 head of horses, and they're trying to break their way into the Big Hole Valley, Jackson Wisdom, not too far from where we live. And what's intriguing, when Lewis and Clark came through that country, there was nothing to eat. It seemed like a barren waste. There was nothing there. But it was in August. Most of the buffalo or game was at elevation. Well, they shoot 30 buffalo, Alexander Ross's party, when they get into the Big Hole. So it starts to paint a different picture of what the country was truly like. And then they went on to make a circle. They dropped back onto the Idaho side, what's today Salmon, Idaho, up to Chalice, up to Stanley, over into Sun Valley country. They made this huge circle trapping beaver. And again, it helps us to understand how the country was being developed or explored. And then after that Mountain Man era, what intrigues us is that a man named Johnny Grant, I don't know if you're familiar with the Grant Coors Ranch in Deer Lodge. See, Johnny Grant, his dad was a mountain man. And a little just about 200 miles south of Dillon is Fort Hall. That's on the Oregon Trail. So we got 1828, they put in Fort Union. 250, 300 miles south, the Oregon Trail starts up 10 years later. And in that next 10 years or 30 years, they think between 400,000 and 500,000 people took to the Oregon Trail. And these are settlers, not just going to Oregon, but pretty soon, when they struck gold in California in 49, many of them started to go to the gold fields. And that's where you see people coming into the West by the thousands. They struck gold in 62 in Bannock. And it wasn't long after that, we see the population of Montana really boomed. Bannock went from a handful of people to 3,000. Then they struck gold in Virginia City in 64. The town boomed to 10,000. And so a man named Nelson Story, he could see the writing on the wall. We need livestock to feed this many people. And he went to Texas and he brought the first cattle back to Montana. And so this is a song that kind of ties in with that, because this song was written in about 1870s. And the last verse says, "Oh, you'll be soup for Uncle Sam's engines." What were they talking about? Those cattle weren't just coming to Montana, they were going to Browning to the reservation, because the buffalo were pretty well done. So it's an old song that you've all heard. Feel free to sing it with me. I was walking one morning for pleasure. I spied a cow puncher. He was riding along. His hat was thrown back, spurs wasn't jingling. As he approached me, he was singing this song. And oh, you long little doggies, if your misfortune, it ain't none of my own. Oh, you long little doggies, know that Montana is gonna be yours. Some of the boys go up the trail for pleasure. Oh, that's where they get most awfully wrong. They no idea the trouble that they give us as we go a-trailing them doggies along. And oh, you long little doggies, it's your misfortune, it ain't none of my own. Oh, you long little doggies, know that Montana is gonna be yours. Said, oh, you'll be soup for Uncle Sam's engines. It's beef, beef, I hear God. Get along, get along, get along, little cattle peas, 'cause you're gonna be beef steers, fire and whoop-ki-yi-oh. Get along, little doggies, it's your misfortune, it ain't none of my own. Whoop-ki-yi-oh. Get along, little doggies, know that Montana is gonna be your beautiful. Know that Montana is gonna be your beautiful. Hopefully that paints a different picture of that.
Yeah. Never really thought about what they were, the story that song told. Yeah, I never really thought about it before.
I never knew that the last verse. I thought, what are they talking about?
Yeah.
And this is written by a real cowboy that came up the trail in 1880 or 1879 or someplace in there. But that's what they were talking about, taking them to Browning to the reservation. Of course, Charlie Russell came on the scene in 1880. He was 16 years old. He was raised in St. Louis, and he wanted to be a cowboy. And like many of the young kids, they were looking for adventure. Many of us can think back when we were young and we're looking for adventure and we're looking for places to go, some excitement. Well, those kids that lived along the trail, they wanted to come up the trail. And you have to remember, the first cattle, that came up were 1866, Nelson's Story. This is right after the Civil War. 600,000 young men are dead in this country from the Civil War. The workforce wasn't there. So many of the cowboys that came up the trail were very young. Some I've read as young as 13, 14 years old. Maybe they were in big families and folks are thinking, at least you're going to get a meal. But then I thought, well, And when we read it and look into some of the history, we think it was all just miserable. And it was tough work, and it was dangerous work. Some of the most dangerous work were, of course, riding tough horses or dangerous cattle. These are longhorn cattle. After the Civil War, they figured there was someplace between 3 and 4 million wild longhorn cattle in Texas. And if you were handy enough to get them gathered and trailed to a railhead or to a place like Fort Sumter, New Mexico, that cow that's worth about $1, you can turn it into a $35 cow. So that right after the Civil War, it's a horrible depression. And of course, we know Confederate money was worthless. And so a lot of those cowboys, they figured, we can get them gathered up and trail, we can make some money doing this. And of course, a lot of the young kids, they thought it'd be an adventure like that last song that said, some of the boys go up the trail for pleasure. Well, that's where they get it most awfully wrong, for they no idea the trouble that they give us as we go trailing them dogies along. Well, yes, it was hard work, but Teddy Blue Abbott, remember Teddy Blue? Teddy Blue came up the trail twice out of Texas, good friends with Charlie Russell. Went on to marry one of Granville Stewart's daughters. Granville Stewart came into the country in 1857 through Dillon. Camped right there in Dillon on the Blacktail. Was harvesting elk in the river bottom, bighorn sheep in the foothills. Paints a different picture than Lewis and Clark painted for us. Gives us more insight into what the country was really like. And Granville Stewart and James, they moved over by Deer Lodge, where Johnny Grant ended up building the Grant Coors Ranch. But when they struck gold in Bannock, Granville and his brother, they'd already started putting some cattle together. And they were getting them, like I said, I think I mentioned, from the Oregon Trail. If they went to the Oregon Trail at Fort Hall, see, settlers that were coming west, a lot of their livestock was wore out by the time they got to Fort Hall. And Richard Grant, Johnny Grant, and those boys figured out, if we can take some of that wore out livestock and we can get it on this side of the divide into the Beaverhead country, they can survive and do very well with no hay. And we'll take them back a year later and we'll trade 2 or 3 for 1. And that's how we built that ranch. That's how we started putting livestock together. The grass in that country and in Montana in general is powerful grass. And when the big snows hit, it doesn't typically lay down. It stands up. Now, buffalo will move grass and eat, and a horse will paw, but a cow needs to be able to see it or get to the grass. And that's why they didn't stay in Colorado and Wyoming. They pushed on to Montana to build ranches. So I thought it'd be fun to write a few songs. I wrote a song called 1800s, and it's about coming out of Texas to Montana back in the 1800s. In the 1800s, good night, loving, they're the legends, cowboy dreams. Pointed north, strike a lead, string 'em out, let 'em walk on, stay please. Our ponies were fresh, country was wild, and 2,000 miles, what for a child. But the trail boss was fair, he knew what he had. Teenage cowboys in a land that was blind. We were green, we were living the dream. Oh, oh. The rivers were swift, those mountains punching those peaks on to the big sky. And old Jake, he told us where the grass was good in old Montana, where he had once stood. So we kept it on up 30 more days till we came across this paradise place where the water was red, the country was fine, and we all agreed, oh, it must be divine. It was green. Oh, we were living the dream. Oh, oh, letting those coyotes sing. Oh, living free. Oh, oh, in the 1800s, good night loving, they're the legends of a cowboy dream. Thanks. Well, do you know who Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving were? Those are names, the Goodnight Loving Trail, coming out of Texas. Many have seen the movie Lonesome Dove. That was a spin-off of Goodnight and Loving. And Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving, right after the Civil War, they were ranchers, and Charles Goodnight was quite a bit younger than Oliver Loving, but Charles Goodnight was a plainsman. And when you read about exploring Texas at that time, oh my, water was so far in between, and trying to get from one water source to the next, and especially trailing cattle. But in the beginning, now in the movie Lonesome Dove, you recall where they came to Montana, and Gus got wounded, and Carl took his good friend all the way back to Texas to bury him. Right? Well, in reality, what happened was Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving was trailing cattle out of Texas to Fort Sumter, New Mexico, which was the beginning of the Goodnight Trail that ultimately came on to Denver, Wyoming, and into Montana. But they were going to Fort Sumter, they were running late, so Bill Wilson and Oliver Loving, Goodnight, sent them ahead to Fort Sumter to let them know that the cattle were coming, because they're running a little late. They didn't want to lose that market that they had in Fort Sumter. Well, they got pinned down by some Comanche Indians. And if you read anything about Comanche Indians and compare them, we know the Blackfeet were fierce in their day, weren't they? When we read stories about the Blackfeet, they were a powerful nation and a very fierce nation. But they say the Comanche were even more so. Well, they pinned them down in a little bunch of rocks, and well, anyhow, they finally did escape, and they got into Fort Sumter, or I think Oliver Loving did. Bill Wilson ended up going back to the herd, just like in the movie. Well, Oliver Loving got wounded in the wrist, and gangrene set in. And they took his arm off in Fort Sumter, but he died of gangrene. But before he died, Charles Goodnight made it into the fort, just like in the movie. And Oliver Loving asked him, "Would you take me back to Texas to bury me?" And he said he would. 600 miles he took him back in a wagon. So that's the type of camaraderie I guess you see in cowboys in that time period. And so
You wonder what to do with the body that whole time.
you know, they packed it in charcoal.
Hmm.
They packed it in charcoal. It was a weird deal when you read about it. It's kind of I don't know how well it worked, but they did. So a lot of these songs that we sing kind of revolve around those, yeah.
I wouldn't have thought of that, Paul, so glad you did.
So this is another one. I don't know if you ever listened to any Don Edwards. So Don Edwards, he kept cowboy music alive. Historically correct cowboy music alive. I was afraid of shit. We lost him a couple years ago. This is a song that he wrote called Goodbye to Montana. Up before the sunrise, it's a rocky road back home. See, the dust won't near be settled, as it's just where we came from. I'll keep my promise to you, just like I said I would, and lay you neath the pecan trees, hang your spurs for good. Say goodbye to Montana, where the northerns always blow. Paintbrush will be blooming by the time I get you home. We drove a herd from Texas to the big Montana sky. Oh, I swear some days I'd wonder if we make it here alive. I wish I could have told you that you were my best friend. Oh, I guess you always knew that we were both too tough to bend. Say goodbye to Montana, where the northerns always blow. Paintbrush will be blowing by the time I get you home. All honor to the cowboy, praises to him, let's say, oh, he never sold his saddle. That's the most important thing. Adios to old Montana, where the northern always blow. Paintbrush will be blowing by the time I get you home. There's another song kind of favorite. It's always about Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving. Actually, when Larry that wrote Lonesome Dove, yeah, they say his name again. Marjorie. When he wrote the book Lonesome Dove, see, he was really writing about Nelson's story that brought the first cattle from Montana in 1866. The second cattle that we know Johnny Grant was already here with cattle. And James and Granville Stewart were already here with some cattle. These guys were miners too. They were looking for, they had a little claim in Deer Lodge. But Granville Stewart mentioned, he said, he went to the gold fields in '49 on the American River in California. And he said, I would have made way more money bringing deer into camp. He says, I was a good hunter. He says, I made more money selling a deer in camp than I ever would finding gold, because we know a lot of guys, a few guys made a lot of money, but the majority of them just got by. And that's what James and Granville Stewart did when they struck gold in Bannock. They brought livestock to Bannock. They had a few cattle and they brought them down there. But by the time the town, like I said, it exploded to 3,000 people. And then they struck gold in Elder Gulch or Virginia City. And that's where it jumped to 10,000. How do you feed 10,000 people with no livestock? And so times are really changing. We see some of the cowboy history, that cowboy history really took place in a 20-year period. And it influenced the whole planet in 20 years. 1866, the first cattle come up out of Texas. 1886, remember what happened in 1886? And Charlie Russell paints the picture, the little postcard, the last of 5,000, or he calls it Waiting for a Chinook. Remember what happened? The summer of 86 in Montana was a horrible drought. And the range, the open range by 1886 was overstocked with cattle. There were thousands of cattle trailed in from Texas. It was just free grass. That's why they came. All the grass and the railheads were getting closer. But the winter strikes of 86 and 87, and it kills most of the open range cattle. Most of the big outfits went out of business that year. And after that, that's when we see barbed wire comes on the scene. They had to start putting up hay. They knew they were going to have to be prepared for a tough winter. And so times were changing, but that 20-year period, the open range was wild, the cowboy life. And if you look at Charlie Russell art, like I said, he was a historian. When you see those wild pictures like Bronc to Breakfast, and you see, the last of, Waiting for a Chinook, and many of his other ones about Native Americans hunting buffalo horseback, can you imagine how wild that was? To run your horse out there, it's hard to get to see him run. So we've trained lots of rope horses. So you train a rope horse, he runs out there to a cow, and he runs right up to the left hip. And you can rope him every time. He puts you in that spot, and a good rope horse that you've trained will rate a cow, and he'll stay right there. No matter where that cow goes, he's right on that left hip, waiting for you to rope that cow. What would those Indians on a right-handed warrior or buffalo hunter, that horse would run, I got that wrong, to the left hip. They would run to that right hip where they would get that shot with their bow. And so those horses, those good buffalo ponies, were trained to rate a buffalo just like a rope horse is trained to rope and rate a cow. So it's kind of fun to look at his art and see how it tied in with history. So I had to write a song about Charlie Russell. And Charlie Russell, like I said, he came in 1880. And how did he get to the country from St. Louis? Well, the Transcontinental Railroad made it in 1869. So the railroad's in 69 from basically following that Oregon Trail. And so by 1880, the railroad had branched off and they're coming towards Dillon, and they make it to Red Rock, actually it's Dell, Montana, about 45 miles south of Dillon. By 1880, the railroad had made it to there, and they're pushing their way to the copper fields in Butte for the railroad. So Charlie Russell takes the train to Red Rock, then he's stagecoach from Red Rock up to Helena, and then he's horseback into the Judith Basin. In his first year, he's a sheep herder. He didn't want to be a sheep herder, did a lousy job, got fired. He was working for a relative. And the second year, he comes back to Montana. And thankfully, when you read how it unfolded, he's kind of just roaming around like a vagabond. He has hardly anything, and he runs into Jake Hoover. And Jake Hoover takes him under his wing and basically teaches him how to survive in the wilderness. Jake Hoover's not only a miner, he's a market hunter. He hunts game and takes it to the mines. And he's showing Charlie the country. And so it's the next year that Charlie gets on one of the big outfits on the Judith Basin as a nighthawk or a horse wrangler. So there's no fences. So Charlie's job is to go out and take care of the horses at night and make sure they're back at the wagon at daybreak. Now, no flashlights. Your only light is maybe you have an old kerosene lamp at the wagon, but you're not taking that with you. You're out, and when it's so pitch black, you can't see your hand in front of your face. But yet, Charlie takes care of the horses, and the cow boss, what did he say? He said, we'll probably all be afoot come morning, but we're going to give him a try. But Charlie went on to be a great horse wrangler. He never claimed to be a great cowboy, but he could dang sure ride a horse good, and he could rope. But those pictures that he painted of those cowboys riding broncs and getting wild, Charlie hated bucking horses. And that's true. We've worked on a lot of big outfits, and there's some cowboys that are really good at riding bucking horses, but most of them aren't. And like Teddy Blue Abbott said, you can't get nothing done on a bucking horse. You have broke horses, you can go get things done on. So, but Charlie, he painted the wild side of things, the historically correct side of things. So he was putting down on canvas was living history. It happened before his eyes. See, 1882, this is before the big die-off in 86. So we get to spend those years out on the wagon. And he was taking it all in. Some folks say that they think that he wanted to keep being a nighthawk or a wrangler because during the day he was making sketches and he was always molding clay and he was taking in information. And after the big die-off in 86 and 87, he could have gone back to St. Louis. His parents were very wealthy, but he lived a rough life. He went to Canada and lived with the Blood Indians. And he learned that's how he could paint so much correctness into his art when it came to Native American history. So when we look at his art, we see what he captured for us. He captured a life that disappeared in his day or was disappearing, but really not that long ago, as I mentioned, in my great-grandfather's era. But so I had to write a song about Charlie, and I call it Nighthawk, and tells I think it's a historically correct song about him. Talking too much. He was just a kid when he felt the call. It's in the spring of 1880. He was 16 years old. He didn't know it all. And the northern rain was fading. Still he took it all in the back of his mind. Of the Negro dares in those wild bronc rides to the native man. All his ways, you see, a cowboy's life was all he craved. Made him a nighthawk, northern rain. Made him a nighthawk on northern rain. In the dark at night, oh, snow and rain. It was back in the day when a fire was your life, and tending the cabby, them horses meant our lives. So we laid it down for us all to see, to ease the gift to old Montana history. And he captured that life with the tip of his brush, of them old time ways we miss so much. And just think of the nights out under the stars, where we learned to spin so many yarns. Yes, it takes us back to the days gone by, where it's only cowboys who can keep it alive. Made him a nighthawk, northern rain. Made him a nighthawk on the northern rain. Moonlight nights, a starry gaze. It was back in the day when a fire was your life, and tending the cabby, them horses meant our lives. Made him a nighthawk, northern rain. My Charlie Russell song. You know, a lot of folks, you know, they talk about, like I said earlier, probably the cowboy has influenced more people on the planet than we can imagine. But at the same time, probably one of the most misunderstood individuals. Why would a guy work for nothing under those kind of harsh conditions? Many times going hungry, riding at night like Charlie did, so pitch black you can't see your hand in front of your face. But like Teddy Blue Abbott said, he said, you know, all the old timers talk about all the dangers, the river crossings, which killed more cowboys' lives, swimming herds of cattle across the river, than stampedes or wild Native Americans or whatever the case may be, or outlaws. But like Teddy Blue said, none of the old timers talked about all the fun we had. Yeah, when we punched cows where we worked for $300 a month, but we had a lot of fun too. Yeah, it was long days and it was early mornings. It was to make a living. Charlie Russell, and I quote, he said, wouldn't you like to get a good horse under you and ride over some real grass country and get down on your belly and drink from a high mountain stream? See, that's the inner kind of peace that you get, the inner feeling you get from making a living from the back of a horse. And so that's why even cowboys today, in many ranches right here in Montana, Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, they cowboy for a small amount, but to be able to make a living horseback, you can hardly paint the picture. But sometimes a song can do it for us. This is a song written 100 years ago called Cowboy. And I always, when I think about those first lyrics, it starts out, it goes, I'm lonesome, but happy. I'm rich, but I'm broke. And the good Lord knows the reason I'm just a cowboy. So, you know, this is written 100 years ago, so it paints that picture of what a cowboy was about. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the prestige. It was about a way of life. Lonesome but happy, rich but I'm broke, and the good Lord knows the reason I'm just a cowboy. From Cheyenne to Douglas, all the ranges I know. Oh, I drift with the wind, no one cares where I go. No, I ain't got a dime in these wore-out old jeans, so I'll stop eating steak and I'll go back to beans. I'll pick up a 10 spot and rest it I know. Oh, I'm riding the broncs in the big rodeo. Ooh, 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 ooh. Some evening in the springtime, a filly I'll find. Oh, I might be all summer with her on my mind. But I'll never be branded, never be broke. I'm a carefree range riding, drifting cowboy. years ago. A guitar, I think. There we go. Like I mentioned, some of the this is another song I wrote called Scattering the Riders. So if you look at Charlie Russell's art, you'll see a painting that he did called Scattering the Riders. And L.A. Huffman, that took all the photographs back in the 1880s. I don't know if you look at any L.A. Huffman photographs. Evelyn Cameron also was in the late 1800s, going out to different ranches in Montana and trying to get photographs at that time period. And it's amazing what they got done in their photographs. But the spin-off of Charlie Russell's painting, Scattering the Riders, back in the day, before barbed wire fences and whatnot that hold the big roundups. And the big roundups, and there might be 4 ranches that would throw together, and they knew they were going to meet at a certain place, and all the cattle would mix. And so they would throw together maybe 2,000-3,000 head of cattle. And 4 different ranches are there, and they start making their cuts, cutting brands 4 different directions. And they would pull out wagons of their bed wagons. Some ranches I've read where they take 3 wagons out, 1 full of firewood. Not a lot of firewood out here sometimes to burn. So they'd take firewood and they'd take a chuck wagon and they'd take a bed wagon with other supplies. So, and then they might take 150 saddle horses per ranch. And there might be 15 cowboys on each outfit, on each ranch. So you got 60 cowboys at the big roundup. And that's where northern rodeos came from. We go to rodeos today and you see bucking horses and you see roping and you see all kinds of different events that they hold today. But really, even though we know the Spaniards were holding rodeos years ago in Mexico, but up north, that's where rodeos came from, is the big ranches, when the big roundups, when they held those roundups. Because if you were good at riding broncs, there's your audience, 60 other cowboys. You made sure you stepped on a bad one in front of everybody. Kind of a way to prove yourself a little bit. Or if you were really handy with a rope, people knew the good ropers. They knew the good bronc riders. They knew the good horsemen, the ones that they could build a really good cutting horse. And so, and if you look at Charlie Russell's painting, I'm kind of jumping over now. There's another painting called The Roundup. And millions of people have walked by that painting, and it sets down in Helena normally. Right now it's in Great Falls. The biggest collection on the planet of Charlie Russell art is sitting in Great Falls right now. And you walk by that painting, and for most people, I don't think they really understand what Charlie was getting at, because this is one of the most impressive parts of history in that era, in the 1870s and 80s, is the big roundups. And if you look closely into his painting, you'll see where they've cut cattle here, and you got some cowboys holding this small herd. Then the rest of the cowboys are holding the big herd. And then each ranch is making their cuts. And some of the cowboys are branding some of the calves that are cut their way. And you'll hear the term, they've sent out a rep. And a rep is like a modern day brand inspector, to make sure they were putting the correct brands on the correct calves. So when they made a cut, they were keeping it to where everybody was fair, and your brand went on your calves and so forth. So much is happening in that painting. And so I thought, maybe I'll write a song about the roundup, and I call it Before Broncs Went to Town. And if you look up my music on YouTube, we've put L.A. Huffman photographs to the song to help people understand what was happening. And so maybe what I'll do is I'll do that song for you, because it paints a picture of, goes in line with Charlie Russell's painting, The Roundup. The outside circle was 100 miles around. Four big outfits growing cattle, growing deer ground. Well, how soon we all forget how things they used to be. On the northern range, with the cowboys, life was free. Well, you could see it unfold before your eyes on the land. 3,000 head of cattle, 60 top hands. Well, good horses, bronc rides, and the best gear that you'll ever see. On the open range, the 1817. And it's all before cross the town. Teddy come north with a herd this late last fall. Building them old bridle horses that don't even beat all. And old Hank, he could throw that grass rope as far as the sea. With a backhand, but he could pick up 2 hind feet. And it's all little cross of the town. How soon we all forget how things used to be. On the northern range, the 1817. It's all across the town. Yeah, so anyhow, after that, I was talking a little bit about Charlie Russell painting that picture, scattering the riders. Anybody need a break? You doing okay?
I'm just gonna change the spot where I'm sitting.
Feel free to take this chair.
So me and Debbie rode down there in Dillon a lot. We rode a lot of that country south of Dillon in what's called Sage Creek, and it's a huge drainage, but it's kind of between Charlie Russell's painting Scattering the Riders and all the country we used to ride there in Sage Creek. It kind of inspired the song. We saddle for daybreak, it's a cow boss's call. Put a gather on no stage trick, pushing another ball. As they scatter us riders, old paint's a little tight. The outside would fit him just right, and we'll ride that big sea of sage. Yeah, let's ride. And we'll ride that big range again, where the cattle are wild, horses ain't tame. We like it that way. No, it can't get enough. You see a cowboy's life, bound to be rough, we'll still ride that big range again. Truth at this time. Years roll by like a morning mist, and our minds drift back to the days when we lived. A whole saddle, good horses, and them stars up above. Life most only dream of. Hey, let's ride that big sea of sage. Yeah, let's ride. And we'll ride that big range again, where the cattle are wild and horses ain't tame. We like it that way. Hope it can't get enough to see a cowboy's life, bound to be rough, we'll still ride that big sage again. But yeah, that's my tribute to Charlie Russell Sr. Scattering the riders. And how that works, well, I thought that was so important because I see L.A. Huffman took pictures of it. And Charlie Russell puts a lot of time into painting the picture when you see it. But you can also see that song on YouTube if you look me up under Philip Page, 1L and Philip. And you'll see the painting that Charlie Russell did. And it was the cow boss or the jigger boss, that's second in command under the cow boss, is scattering the riders. You don't just ride out 15 cowboys and go, I'm going to go where I want to, I'll go. But the cow boss tells each individual where to go. And when he puts you in a position, you better be in that position when the gather's done and you get to the roundup, because it's systematically done. And when that song, when I say old paint's a little tight and the outside would fit him just right, the outside circle is twice as far as the inside circle. And so all the young cowboys with the wilder, bronchier kind of horses, they get the outside circle because that's where all the work is, making those big gathers. And so when Charlie Russell paints that painting, you can see a horse in the background bucking. You can bet he gets the outside circle. He's a young horse and he needs the job. He needs the wet saddle blankets. And the older cowboys, they have the inside circle. They're going to make it to the roe deer grounds or the roundup grounds first, hold cattle, and be able to read everything. And the young cowboys have the bigger job to the outside. And when you're young, it can't get tough enough. You know, that's just the way it is. And it's kind of fun history to look at. So much of it, I had back in 1980, I was working on a big outfit down here, I think it's snow again. We're working on a ranch in northern Nevada. The YP ranch runs 7,500 mother cows. They had 100 head of horses in the horse cavity. There was 10 of us riding there. It was just like stepping back in time. And so we worked on that big outfit. And then we come into Wells, Nevada. You probably know where Wells is. You ever been down through from Jackpot down to Elko and on to Reno, that direction. But anyhow, Wells is a little town down there. We rode some colts there for the Mares River Ranch. And I wanted to go to work on another big outfit. So I called the MC Ranch out of Adel, Oregon. And anybody familiar with Ian Tyson music? Ian Tyson passed away a couple of years ago, but Ian Tyson wrote Four Strong Winds. Remember that song?
Mhm.
Yeah. And they're, ain't called go out to Alberta. A whole bunch of people recorded this song. I'll sing it and then we'll get back into the history. Got the words. Got some friends I could go working for. Still, I wish you change your mind. I'll ask you one more time. We've been through this 100 times or more. You know me. Four strong winds that can blow lonely, 7 seas that run high, and all those things that never change from what made. If the good times are all gone, I'll be bound for moving on. And I'll look for you, never back this way. If I get there before the snow flies, things are looking good. You could meet me if I send you down the fair. But by then it wouldn't be winter, not too much for you to do. And those winds, they blow cold way out there. Four strong winds that blow lonely, 7 seas that run high. All these things that never change, but what may. If the good times are all gone, I'll be bound for moving on. I'll look for you, never this way. Anyhow, that's Ian Tyson song. That's the first song that he wrote. But so anyhow, so Ian Tyson writes a song about the MC horses. Well, I wanted to go to work on the MC. It was one of the biggest outfits, biggest ranches in Southeast Oregon. And Ian Tyson wrote a song because the ranch went out of business after I worked there. But back in 1980, I went over there. When you went to work for the big outfits, when I got there, they cut you a string of horses, and you're the only one that gets to ride those horses. And usually it's 6 or 8 horses in your string. And so they cut me one horse. He's a brown gelding, and the jigger boss tells me he's the second in command under the cow boss, and he's roping horses out for us. you don't, everybody doesn't go into the horse herd and start roping. The jigger boss or the cow boss catch your horses for you, and they rope them out of the herd. And lots of times, you'll see on my Facebook page that I'm working on the Wine Cup Ranch, and we've trained all the horses to stand up with their tails to us. There might be 100 head of horses in there. And if the rope just lands on them, they know to back out and come up to you. Well, anyhow, he's catching horses and he tells me this brown horse is bad to buck. But you don't have a choice. You have a choice, I guess you do. You can either roll the bed roll and leave, or you ride him when it's his turn. Well, I got around this horse for about 2 months, real good, didn't have any trouble. And then one morning, me and a guy named Pat America had the outside circle because we were on the green horses. And we had this big old climb to make, and I loosened up and I'm kind of riding this old brown gelding out across the desert gathering cattle. And Pat took off. He might have been a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile away from me. Well, this horse blows up and bucks with me. And I wasn't ready for him. And he bucked me off. And I hung up a foot in a stirrup and he's dragging me through the brush and scared me to death. I mean, really chilled me out. And I left a set of spur tracks across my cantle board on my new Spider Teller saddle. And so he's been etched in my mind now for what, 40 something years. And anyhow, so I had to write a song about Ely. And this song is called The Mighty MC. And it's kind of on the lines of Strawberry Roan, but it's a true story. But some of the terminology will keep you guessing. For instance, do you know what it means to, if you work for $1 a day and found? That term was room and board. Found meant room and board. There's probably some other words in here that might keep you guessing a little bit. Some of the terminology over the years has changed a lot. We all know that. I was hanging around Wells one morning. I just sent all the old broncs home. 200 miles west of Elko. That's a big outfit that I'll call home. Ian, he wrote about her, how that cabby was the last to go. In my mind I can see that mighty MC, where I pulled the hitch a long time ago. About 40 years more, maybe 45. I rolled into Jack Creek that evening, spread my blankets flat on the ground. Morning came for daybreak, oh, Papayos rope corral. And the jigger boss catching our horses, big seal Brown's cut to me. He said you might keep an eye on this beast. The outfit calls him Ely. I was young and wild. Olden days I could trot 30 miles. Like cowboy legends go, living like the days of old. At America and I had the outside. Oh, it's a big climb ahead for our steeds. 5 figures of fresh is off him when mid-morning he lit into me. I'm hanging for all that I'm worth. I guess old Ely's gonna settle the score. In my mind I can see that mighty MC. Those tracks across my cantle board. I was young, a little wild. Over the days I could trot 30 miles. It's like cowboy legends go, living like the days of old. Well, if you ever head out toward Adel, that desert wears a powerful crown. And just think of them old time cowboys, $1 a day and found. Oh, maybe a horse like Ely, one that'll keep you awake in the night. GMC. That horse gave me such a fright. I was young and wild. Olden days I could trot 30 miles. Like cowboy legends go, living like the days old. We were living like the days old. True story.
So how'd you get out of the,
I rolled over and finally shook loose.
yeah,
Lots of times you get turned over. I had oxbow stirrups on, and I had a pair of Paul Bond boots on with high heels, and anyhow, and when that
you
song
roll
talks,
over, you try to,
like you don't ask me, I probably didn't do it on purpose, but I'm getting floundered around so bad. Finally, my foot come out of the stirrup,
Yeah.
but it scared me. It chilled me out. Now I've talked to two cowboys since then, and one of them got hung up. Mike Bridges is his name, world-renowned horsemanship clinician. And he told me when he got hung up, he started seeing these things in his mind when he was a little baby. His life was going before his, when they talk about your life before your eyes or whatever. And then another guy that got hung up told me quite a story about every time he got to that place, it was on their personal ranch. And he says, I'd ride into that draw and I could smell that sagebrush because he got hung up and drugged bad. And it didn't kill him, but it was close to it. And he told me it made him sick to his stomach every time he got there. But this horse got inside my mind. So that cowboy era is still out there today. These ranchers are still out there on the big outfits. Cowboys are still making a living horseback. Now, Charlie Russell, he worked for an outfit in Montana called the Phillips Ranch, and it was known for having horses that were bad to buck. And Charlie says, I didn't take on any extra flesh that summer. In the lyric of that song, it says, talking about keeping you up at night. If you remember that in the last verse, I say, that'll keep you awake in the night. They do. I mean, you're worried about how am I going to get this horse rode the next day? Well, it's interesting. Charlie Russell, he had the same feelings because he said, I didn't take on any extra flesh that summer because he spent a lot of time worrying how he was going to get them horses rode. In fact, he said, I had to have somebody else roll my cigarettes for me. I thought that was hilarious when he said that. When you read Charlie Russell's book, Trails Plowed Under,
Yep.
Have you read that book?
yep,
The one of the funniest stories, it's not funny in today's world, but it was funny back then. It's one of his first stories, and it's called The Gift Horse. And this cowboy's on a ranch, and he's got a horse that's really bad to buck and strike and kick, and he's an outlaw. And this guy's a bronc stomper, but he can't get him broke. He said, what am I gonna do with this beast? My old friend, Jay so-and-so is getting married about 100 miles away. I think I'll give him to him for a wedding present. So he leads the horse over. He gives him this horse as a wedding present, doesn't tell him anything. He just rides off, A year later, he runs into him at a roundup. And the cowboy says, I'll tell you what, Charlie says, if I ever get married again, don't bring me any wedding presents, because if you do, they'll be buying you lots of flowers. They're gonna bury you. But that's the kind of cowboy humor that was going around. And when Teddy Blue Abbott said, they didn't talk about the fun they had. They did have a lot of fun. Oh yeah, there were tough times. It was wild. But when you see Charlie painted all those cowboys going to town, and you see them going in the saloon and they're riding their horses in the saloon and it's shooting their pistols off. They're getting wild. You see, they couldn't have alcohol on the wagon. That's where the term came from. If a guy quits drinking, they say he's on the wagon. That's where it came from. He's on the wagon. Can't drink on the wagon. Can you imagine? What would you get done if everybody was drinking out there? Nothing. You had to have your head, screwed on. And so it was really important that they took their job serious. But when the roundup was over and they went to town, they yahooed it up a little bit. To say the least.
Yeah, probably a lot of it.
Oh, what time? I guess we're kind of, are we going overtime a little?
Just a little, yeah, but that's okay.
We okay? We probably should wrap it up here pretty soon.
We're fine. I'll speak for myself.
You know, when we go to a rodeo and you watch people rope, they calf rope, or what do they call it, tie down rope, or they steer rope, they rope steers and head and heel steers. And sometimes out on the ranch we do that, but lots of times we don't rope that way out on the ranch, because on the ranch we're trying to doctor cattle. Normally we're catching cattle that are sick. So we're trying to get them caught and laid down, stretched out as quick as we can without stressing them any more than need be. So we're throwing a lot of different loops. We're not throwing traditional overhand loops. We're throwing what's called the hula hand, or sometimes it can be a backhand swing and a hula hand delivery. Or we're throwing like a sidearm swing. You never see this in the rodeos. You'll see it in the Mexican style rodeos, and there'll be hip shots. And back in the day, the ropes were either rietas made out of rawhide, or their ropes were made out of grass. And so they were really limber. Today's lariats are usually pretty stiff. A lot of those ropes back then were really soft. So if you could throw a loop out there and hang that loop on the hip, and then the tail or the tip of the loop would go underneath and pick up 2 hind feet. These are all different cowboy loops that a lot of cowboys practice today. They practice hula hands and Johnny blockers and different loops that you throw that are very practical outside, but you don't really see them inside in the arena so much. They're not timed events out there. They're who can get cattle caught the quickest and the most efficient and get them laid down, stretched out, and doctored. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to write a song about some of our different loops, and I call the song Cowboy Living. So anyhow, when some of the terminology will hopefully that'll help a little. Got a backhand swing and a hula hand throw. You won't know these words unless you rode for the big outfits on them open plains. Cowboys wild, raising cane, but we're living in cowboy land. Sidearm swing and a hip shot throw, riding them trails up from old Mexico. It's back in the day when a man wore a gun. Like Muzzy said, they told time by the sun. They were living in cowboy land. And we're living life out here on the range. Inner peace that run through the veins. Life that only few men find. Horses and cattle and mountains divine. Living in cowboy land. Hula hand swing and a blind shot throw. Catch them critters before they know. It's a loop that we throw out here in the West. We can lay them down, little stretch, and we're living in cowboy land. Overhand swing, Johnny blocker throw. Swing that tip to the sky as you go. It's the prettiest loop that you'll ever see when it turns over. Out at 40 feet, yeah, living in cowboy land. And we're living life out here on the range. It's an inner peace, oh, the road through the veins. It's a way of life, no and cattle, oh, and the silver shine, yeah, living cowboy land. Cowboy living. Ooh, ooh, cowboy living. We'll do one more. This is a song that Don Edwards did. A lot. It's called Coyotes. You might have heard it. Anyhow, I think of Charlie Russell's painting, "Laugh Kills Lonesome." It's one of my favorite Russell paintings, and the moon's coming up and it's getting dark, full moon. All the cowboys are around the chuck wagon, and Charlie Russell was not only an artist, but he could spin yarn. He was a storyteller. He was an entertainer, and that's how they entertained one another. Even our parents and grandparents were entertaining each other by telling stories. That's how they kept track of histories and stories about a lot of the relatives and so forth. Well, Charlie, you can see he's telling a story, and all the cowboys are laughing and they're having a big time. They're just waiting there at the wagon, and Charlie's all ready to go out and take care of the horses. And that's it. But he's telling me he's spinning a big one right before he goes out. And I found out just the other day when Charlie painted that picture, one of the last pieces of art that he did before he died, he was mourning the loss of the open range because he saw it in his lifetime from 1880 till he died in 1926. That open range that he got to see and witness and live. 12 years he spent on the open range as a working cowboy, and he got to live it. Most people never have that type of opportunity to be able to paint what they saw, what they actually saw. And so when you look at Russell art from a cowboy standpoint, I can tell when he's got a cowboy throwing a hula hand. I can tell when a cowboy's going to throw a hip shot, or if he's throwing a backhand. And Charlie got that right when he did the art because he was there. And so it's just really interesting to dig into his art. 4,000 pieces of art. It's Montana history at its finest in the heyday years of the cattle bearing years, those years that influenced so many people earthwide. It's all wrapped up in that short time period. That big outfit I was working at the MC, when I wrote that song about the MC horses. See, the traditions come from this time period and happened right here in the Judith Basin, right here in central Montana. This is where the big outfits were. So this song, maybe we'll finish up tonight. Let's see. Make sure I get the right key. Was a cowboy I knew in Montana. His face was burned deep by the sun. Part history, part sage, and part mesquite. He was there when Pancho Villa was young. And he'd tell us some tales of the old days when the country was wild all around. We'd sit out under the stars of the Milky Way and would listen as them coyotes howl and go. Ooh, 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 ooh. Now the longhorns are gone, and the drovers are gone, Comanches are gone, and them outlaws are gone. Geronimo's gone, and Bass Reeves is gone, and the Red Wolf is gone, and the buffalo are gone. We curse all the roads and the oil men, and he cursed the automobile. He'd say there's no place for an hombre like I am in a new world of asphalt and steel. And then he'd look off someplace in the distance. It's something only he could see. He'd say all that's left now of them old days, those darned old coyotes and me. He'd go. Now the longhorns are gone, and the drovers are gone, the Comanches are gone, and the outlaws are gone. Oh, Russell's gone, and Coulter he's gone, and the big sheep are gone, and the buffalo are gone. One morning we searched his old cabin. He disappeared without even a word. But that night, as the moon crossed the mountain, one more coyote was heard. He'd go. I have a tribute there. Edwards too. Well, thank you for coming out this evening. We look at some of this history that's here in Montana, and so many people worldwide are looking at the state today. It's nice to know our heritage, how it got started, what's impressed people. I mean, this is the history that's on people's minds today, is what took place back there from Lewis and Clark, really up until 1900. And it's not that long ago, is it? Yeah. Well, thank you for coming out, and thank you, Sammy Joe, for having us here, and Geraldine to play. We really appreciate it.
It's a long drive for a small crowd.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for coming out. It means a lot.
You had a lot of snow in Dillon. I saw a picture.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You guys driving back tonight?
No, we're gonna play in